Welcome to our channel Scary Sagas, where we bring you the most amazing true horror stories. Today, we have bone-chilling stories that will make your blood run cold. These stories are based on real events and have been passed down among the people. Are you ready to hear the ghastly ghosts and demonic spirits that still roam the deserted halls and corridors? Before she relocated, I used to visit my buddy at her home in a rural farming area. We would just hang around and draw when I would frequently stay over. There were two mirrors in the room reasonably near to the television, and I typically slept on the couch in the living room. I noticed shadows moving behind me as I was walking by with the television off. I initially believed it to be merely a twisted television screen. After work, I went into the living room to fetch my sketchbook so I could draw in her bedroom one evening. I looked in the mirror and noticed a man standing behind me after bending over to pick it up and standing up straight. In the corridor leading to the living room, a man was standing. He was slightly older, bald, and about average height. When I turned to face him, nobody was there. When she turned to turn back to the mirror, he was gone. I was a little uneasy. On another occasion, we were just relaxing in the living room when we heard what appeared to be a young child racing fast upstairs. While she had two grown siblings, they were away at work when we were together. I made the decision to spend the night in my friend's room rather than the living room at that time, only to see four of her posters slowly peeling off the wall when you woke up in the middle of the night. They weren't collapsing and dragging one another down. They gave off the impression that someone was gently removing the tape and taking them down. My friend put them back up the following morning and said, "I need to get better tape for these." After a while, she and her family had to leave since they could no longer afford to stay. We had never truly discussed what had occurred in the house because we believed that discussing it would make things worse. I eventually said, however, after she moved, "Dude, your home was really eerie. Hope you understand that." She responded, "Yes, it was. I knew. It was probably them or something because a man and his granddaughter resided there. But he killed her before killing himself. Because I didn't want to make you afraid to hang out with me. I didn't tell you." Then she pulled out a copy of a news piece about the murder that she had seen in a nearby newspaper. The image that accompanied the article was of the man I observed standing behind me. Sadly, I'm not sure where to go for the article right now or even if my body still has her copy. I'm sure I could find it if I looked hard enough. But I don't have the time and I don't live near that neighborhood anymore. They moved away about 10 years ago, so I don't even recall her town or address. We recently relocated to a new home. The renter who was residing in the property passed away unexpectedly in his mid-40s from natural causes as we were in the process of purchasing it. In the center of the living room, he passed away. Almost immediately after we move into the house, our 2-year-old daughter begins mentioning the spirit that resides there. Let's face it, 2-year-olds are highly impressionable, and she is just 2. It's very likely that all of the mentions of ghosts were simply the result of her frequent reading of the Halloween-themed picture book she possessed since Halloween had just passed. Yet she kept telling me that the ghost was in the basement where she played, or that it was on the stairs, or that it was in the corner. Even if there was a ghost haunting our home, she didn't seem to be terrified of him and treated him like a friend. So I wasn't too worried. It might undoubtedly be much worse if he's a friendly and helpful ghost. I'd frequently reassure the ghost that he was free to leave if doing so would bring him greater happiness. I had about a 30/70th chance of the ghost being real and that she could see and communicate with him, as opposed to the ghost being a figment of her young reader's fanciful mind. One morning, while we were leaving for the car to get to daycare, it was raining and still dark outside. My daughter informed me that the ghost was on the back deck and that she wanted to sing him a happy birthday because it was his birthday today. Because she is birthday crazy and previously made us sing happy birthday to Mickey Mouse, a bowl of fruit snacks, and the lavatory. I basically ignored what she was saying this time. We then continued about our lives after singing and wishing the ghost a happy birthday. Later that day, I searched for the man's obituary out of pure curiosity because he had passed away in our home. And what a surprise that is. His birthday, for crying out loud. My grandma's living room had a lamp in one corner that hardly ever went out. She would change the bulb every week like clockwork, waiting until the afternoon sunlight flooded through the windows and filled the room. She rushed through the act and held her breath until it was finished and the lamp was turned back on. I occasionally would ask her about it. She would lightly grin, tousle my hair, and quickly shift the topic each time. When I initially switched out the lamp at age 13, I didn't realize the truth. I merely wanted to observe what would occur. When grandmother entered the gloomy living room, a dish of cookies crashed to the floor as they were in her hands. When she hurried to turn on the light, I overheard her muttering a prayer. When she turned to face me, her lips were pushed thin and her eyes were filled with tears. She suddenly gave me a strong slap across the face. I couldn't cry since I had never heard my grandmother raise her voice. She sobbed for long enough for both of us, encircling me in her arms and pleading for my pardon. Finally, she revealed the lamp to me while her face was buried in my shoulder. She claimed it was a ghost light. She has been troubled by ghosts ever since she and my grandpa purchased the home when they first came to America. She didn't turn to grandfather for assistance until her load was about to drive her insane. He astonished her by nodding solemnly when she expected him to laugh her out of the home. He had started the ghost light, and she had never encountered another ghost as long as it shone through the night. After that, I stopped going to see my grandmother. At first, I only missed a few days here and there, but by the time I learned of her passing, it had been more than 10 years. I shouldn't have been shocked when I inherited her house as I was her sole living relative of hers. I couldn't speak, though, as I sat in her attorney's office and listened to him read her will. After that, I found it impossible to focus since I was so preoccupied with trying to remember. I made my decision right away when I considered my small and aseptic flat in the city because those walls had been filled with so much love and good memories. As I entered through the main door, I felt on the verge of tears. Everything was just as I had recalled it from my youth. The living room's ghost light was still burning, and there were still houseplants piled up on the windowsills and beautiful bird plates hanging from the walls. My spine chilled as I saw the old lamp. The smile on my face started to fade as I stopped in my steps, and I couldn't help but remember the night grandmother smacked me all those years ago. The following day, I informed my mother about the ghost light, but she disregarded it as just antiquated superstition. She assured me that it was the same when she was growing up and that I shouldn't be concerned. But I couldn't get rid of the feeling that I had now grasped the full extent of my grandma's madness. I thought as I brushed my fingers through the lampshade's fringe, a bloom of melancholy tainting my fond memories. I sighed and clicked the ghost light out with a firm motion. Later that night, something woke me up. Until I heard scratching coming from the living room, I was lying in bed listening to the night. I groaned and rolled over, intending to ignore the rats until the morning because they were the last thing I wanted to deal with right now. I eventually had enough of the occasional itching that kept waking me up from deep sleep. Throwing my blankets aside, I stormed out into the hallway. I didn't bother turning on the lights as I made my way to the living room because moonlight filled the front of the house. I knew every inch of the house, even after so many years, and I moved confidently through the dim light. I was enraged to have been awakened from a dead slumber, and my rage did not adequately prepare me for what I discovered. With her gaunt back to me, an elderly woman was squatting in a corner, sometimes pausing to cock her head. She was scratching at the floor where the walls met. Dread began to gnarl in the pit of my stomach. It took me some time to work up the nerve to approach this woman, even though it was clear that she needed assistance, because I had no idea how she had managed to get inside my home. I reached out to give her shoulder a light squeeze, but my hand shook. I wanted to ask her where she lived and who her carer was, but the words were forced from my head when she turned and I saw her face. She had unfathomable, pitch-black eyes that did not catch the moonlight. Her mouth spiraled down into her throat and her jaw hung impossibly open and unhinged. It took me a little second to comprehend who she was and to recognize the distinctive wrinkle pattern on her face and the curls in her fine hair. My grandmother then yelled. When I stumbled away from the terror in the corner, I screamed. My hands brushed the ghost light as my arms flailed in the air, groping for the closest lamp. She vanished as soon as I jerked the chain and lit up the space. After that, I never turned the ghost light off. I started changing the bulb every week, exactly like grandmother did. After letting it burn out one evening, I eventually got married, and fortunately, my wife was understanding of my odd obsession with the light. The light continued to burn, and I lived my life cheerfully enough. But lately, my grandson has started inquiring about the ghost light. I gently smile each time he asks, tousle his hair, and quickly shift the topic. I refrain from speaking when I reflect on how I distanced myself from my grandmother and judged her to be insane. But I'm worried. I'm aware that I won't always be here, just as I am aware that he will ultimately switch off the ghost light. He might have seen me there, twisted and incorrect, scratching in the corner, and that worries me. My best friend and I used to smoke while driving at night around the local neighborhood's back roads. At the time, we were simply being foolish and young. My companion, who was driving, struck a dog that was in the roadway by mistake as we started to return to our area. We're terrified and jumped out of the car to look for the dog, but it was nowhere to be found. My friend suggested that we simply drive away, but I saw an odd collar on the ground and suggested that we call the authorities. My companion exclaimed that we would be stopped for smoking and that she shouldn't have been operating her father's vehicle in the first place. We departed after I eventually consented, but I'm not sure whether I was simply panicking. In any case, I couldn't help but think of that puppy as we traveled. I now share a 2-bedroom home with my boyfriend in San Jose. I had been on a fitness kick for a while and attempted to run a couple of miles every day. So a few weeks ago I went for a jog in the evening around my neighborhood. Just before dusk, when fewer vehicles are on the road, is when I like to run. It was just starting to become dark outside. The streets were deserted as dusk fell, and the moonlight began to filter through the trees. After approximately a mile of running, I stopped next to a street light to collect my breath. I noticed a dog walking toward the sidewalk as I peered across the street. He appeared to be emerging from a backyard. I expected to see the dog's owner approach behind him, but no one else was visible. With a low growl, the beast cautiously drew near to me. I turned and ran back the way I had come as soon as I spotted him heading in my direction. I glanced behind me after a short while, but the dog was nowhere to be seen. The following day, I inquired about any stray dogs that might be roaming the neighborhood with my partner. He asserted that nothing had been heard or seen. I managed to convince myself afterward that I was just seeing things, so I kept the previous experience a secret from him. This was a mistake, as it proved. I made the decision to go running again that night. Sure enough, the dog was once again approaching the sidewalk when I arrived at that particular street intersection. It moved more quickly this time than it did the night before. As it surged toward me, it began to bark and growl. I was aware that I needed to flee and move as quickly as possible in the opposite direction. I just stood there, frozen in fear, staring directly at the dog for some reason. I've never been more terrified. The barking grew louder, and all I could do was put my hands over my head and hunch over. I screamed loudly because the dog was only a few steps away from me. Then there was stillness. I was astonished to discover that the dog was nowhere to be found when I removed my hands from my head. I took a thorough look around, but all I could see was a dog collar on the ground. When I took it up, it reminded me of the collar from the dog we once had. Although it wasn't exactly the same, it was similar. And like the prior occasion, I found it after a dog disappeared. After experiencing paranoia for a few weeks, I was finally able to resume running at night. I haven't seen the dog since that evening, but I continue to wonder if it was the same animal. Was that a ghost? Was it a specter? Although it doesn't seem likely that it was the same dog, I am certain of what I witnessed. It was as genuine as anything I had ever encountered. Simply said, it is illogical. In the spring of 2007, on the east coast of Central Florida, there is a rest spot away from the roadway. It was late at night. I observed a being between 10 and 14 feet tall, with a vaguely human-like appearance. It had taken a seat. It had a snake-like face. It appeared to be an alien. It had a demonic appearance. Its skin was ashen white. It possessed eyes that were much larger than those of a human. There were no sclera or whites in its eyes. There were only two tiny air openings in its nose. It has an extremely tiny mouth. It appeared haggard, but the huge, hooded, black cloak it was wearing covered its entire body. It gave me a pretty intense look. It spoke to me telepathically and said I am invisible. I had to travel at night. I am invisible. I once believed I had seen an alien. I've been leaning more toward fallen angels and Nephilim lately. When I first saw it, it was entirely in this dimension. It had a clear image. I could see it just as plainly as if it were a person because it was well lit. Is anyone familiar with creatures that resemble these, or was I the only one to see them? They seem to like that these stories will leave you with more questions than answers. They are a reminder that sometimes the truth is much darker and more mysterious than we ever imagined. Join us next time on Scary Sagas for other spine-chilling true stories.